Imagine waking up in pitch-black darkness, suffocating darkness, only to realize you are trapped inside a cold wooden box with 6 feet of heavy dirt pressing down above you. You try to scream, but your voice is muffled by thick fabric, and the air is already starting to feel thin. The wooden lead is completely unyielding, and no matter how hard you push, there is no escape. This was not just a nightmare, it was the ultimate real-world horror for thousands of people living in the 19th century. The paralyzing dread of being buried alive, scientifically known as taphophobia, was a dominant cultural anxiety across Victorian America and Europe. In an era when medical science was still in its infancy, the line between life and death was terrifyingly thin. To combat this living nightmare, inventors raced to design bizarre escape mechanisms, leading to one of the most famous and unsettling creations in history. On June 26, 1894, a New York inventor named Hubert Deveau patented a highly complex device designed to bridge the gap between the grave and the living. Registered as patent number US 522100A, his grave signal was built to give the prematurely buried a literal lifeline, and its story reveals a dark chapter of human history where technology tried and spectacularly failed to conquer our deepest existential dread. To understand why anyone would buy such a device, one must understand the grim reality of 19th century medicine and the societal obsession with death. Before the invention of electrocardiograms or brain activity monitors, doctors relied on primitive methods to declare a person dead. They would hold a mirror to the nostrils to check for condensation, feel for a faint pulse, or simply wait for the body to grow cold. However, diseases like cholera, yellow fever, and typhus routinely swept through cities, throwing victims into deep comatose states or catatonic trances that perfectly mimicked death. In the rush to bury highly contagious bodies, many people were placed in coffins while still breathing. This panic was further fueled by literature. Writers like Edgar Allan Poe became obsessed with the theme of premature burial, publishing chilling tales like The Fall of the House of Usher and The Premature Burial. These stories were not viewed as mere fantasy, they reflected a very real, everyday terror. People of the Victorian era were surrounded by death, practicing elaborate mourning rituals, collecting memento mori jewelry made from the hair of deceased loved ones, and taking post-mortem photographs. The fear of waking up inside a coffin was so intense that famous figures of the era left specific instructions in their wills to ensure they were truly dead. Hans Christian Andersen, the famous fairy tale writer, notoriously kept a note on his bedside table that read, "I only seem dead," and requested that his throat be slit before burial. Frédéric Chopin requested that his heart be removed post-mortem to guarantee he wouldn't be buried alive, a request his family actually fulfilled. This widespread terror created a lucrative market for what became known as safety coffins. Wealthy citizens, terrified of waking up in a dark tomb, demanded a way to signal to the surface if the worst were to happen. Hubert Deveau sought to capitalize on this fear with his ingenious, albeit complicated, grave signal. The device consisted of a long, hollow metal pipe that ran from the coffin lid all the way up through the dirt to the surface of the grave. Under normal circumstances, this pipe was hermetically sealed with a heavy valve to prevent rainwater, mud, or cemetery pests from entering the coffin. Inside the coffin, a delicate ring, wire, or headband was attached to the supposed corpse. If the person awoke and made even the slightest movement of their hand or head, the wire would pull a trigger at the bottom of the pipe. This trigger set off a dramatic mechanical chain reaction. The moment the wire was pulled, a spring-loaded latch at the surface snapped open, releasing the valve and allowing fresh, cool oxygen to rush down the tube so the revived victim could breathe. Simultaneously, the mechanism would forcefully eject a bright red flag, a wooden ball, or a warning sign high into the air above the grave. To any passing cemetery guard, priest, or grieving relative, a raised red flag in the middle of a quiet graveyard was a sudden, unmistakable distress call. It meant that someone beneath the earth was awake, breathing, and desperately waiting to be dug up. While Deveau's grave signal seemed brilliant on paper, it completely ignored the basic laws of biology and decay. When a human body dies, it does not remain completely still. Within hours, the natural process of decomposition begins, causing muscles to stiffen and contract in a process known as rigor mortis. Furthermore, as bacteria break down the body's tissues, they produce significant gases, including methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide. This gas buildup causes the corpse to bloat, swell, and inevitably shift or twitch inside the confined space of the coffin. In a cruel twist of irony, this natural post-mortem movement was more than enough to pull the sensitive wire of Deveau's mechanism. Consequently, cemeteries equipped with these safety devices began to experience terrifying false alarms. In the dead of night, gravekeepers would hear bells ringing or see red flags popping up from newly filled graves. Terrified but obligated to act, caretakers would spend hours frantically digging through the dirt in pitch darkness, only to find a decomposing corpse that had simply shifted due to natural decay. The sheer volume of false alarms turned these safety devices into a source of panic and dark humor. Eventually, gravekeepers began to ignore the signals altogether, defeating the entire purpose of the invention. If a truly living person had tried to trigger the flag, their cry for help would have likely been dismissed as just another decaying body. Deveau's design was not the only one to find a home in the archives of abandoned inventions. The era was filled with rival safety coffin patents, each trying to solve the problem of false alarms in increasingly bizarre ways. There was the design by Dr. Johann Tauberger, which utilized an intricate system of strings tied to the corpse's fingers and toes, leading up to a bell on the surface. The theory was that if the person revived, their movements would ring the bell. This system was highly susceptible to the wind, stray dogs, and decomposition, leading to endless sleepless nights for gravekeepers who kept hearing phantom bells ringing in the wind. Another inventor, Count Michel de Karnitz-Karnitsky, patented an incredibly elaborate safety coffin in 1897. Known as the Karnitz coffin, it featured a system where a glass ball rested on the corpse's chest. If the chest rose even slightly due to breathing, the ball would drop, opening an air shaft, turning on a light inside the coffin, sounding a loud alarm, and raising a flag. The Count actually demonstrated this device publicly, burying a volunteer alive to prove its effectiveness. While the volunteer survived the demonstration, the high cost of manufacturing such a complex system meant that very few were actually sold, and those that were installed suffered from the same issues of biological decay triggering false alarms. In Vermont, Dr. Timothy Clark Smith was so consumed by taphophobia that he took a different approach. Instead of relying on a mechanical flag, he built a custom tomb with a thick, square glass window installed directly above his face, along with a breathing tube and a bell system, so people could look down and verify he was truly dead. If you visit the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Vermont today, you can still find his grave. Over the decades, condensation, algae, and decay have clouded the glass, leaving only a dark, mysterious void, but the physical structure remains, a haunting monument to Victorian existential dread. Other inventors went even further, incorporating escape ladders, keys to the coffin lid, or air pumps into their designs. Some patents even featured explosive coffin torpedoes, though these were actually designed to blow up grave robbers who tried to exhume bodies for medical dissection, adding another layer of danger to the 19th century cemetery. Ultimately, it was not the failure of these mechanical patents that put an end to the safety coffin industry, but rather the rapid advancement of modern medicine and mortuary science. During the American Civil War, the practice of chemical embalming became highly popular. Dr. Thomas Holmes, often considered the father of modern embalming, preserved thousands of fallen soldiers so they could be safely shipped back home to their grieving families. By the early 20th century, embalming had become standard practice across the United States. Because the embalming process involves draining the body's blood and replacing it with formaldehyde and other highly toxic preserving fluids, it effectively guarantees that the person is undeniably dead before they ever touch the soil. Combined with the invention of the stethoscope and more reliable methods of determining brain and cardiac death, the fear of being buried alive gradually vanished from the public consciousness. Hubert Deveau's grave signal, along with dozens of other safety coffin designs, was slowly forgotten, leaving behind only the paper blueprints in the archives of patent offices. These inventions serve as a fascinating window into a time when humanity's deepest psychological fears collided with the Industrial Revolution's obsession with mechanics. They show us how desperately we will fight for a connection to the living world, even when facing the absolute silence of the grave. Today, these designs rest quietly in the archives, a testament to a time when a simple red flag was the only thing standing between a second chance at life and an eternity in the dark. As we look back on these strange, elaborate contraptions, we are reminded that technology changes. Our fundamental fears of the dark, of helplessness, and of being forgotten remains exactly the same. If you enjoyed this journey into the depths of history's most bizarre ideas, make sure to support the channel so we can continue to dig up the forgotten treasures of the past. Until next time, sleep well and keep your eyes on the horizon.